Welcome along, Liana Nici, to the Conditioning Code podcast. This is my second one ever, and we're going to look at nutrition today. We've got a few things that we want to cover. A bunch of my clients have sent some questions through, which you've had a bit of a peek at, but we'll kind of work through together. I want to start off with a little bit of a deep dive into you and your journey and your career so far. Can you kind of talk us through, like from the start of your study through till now, what your journey's been?
Yeah, wow, big one. Start off with that one. That's pretty good. No, thanks so much for having me on. And I'm so excited to see that you had so much interest around this too. Obviously, it's a topic I'm pretty passionate about. But yeah, so I am a dietitian, sports dietitian. I started out, I guess how I became one was I'm a massive foodie. And with an obsession with the human body, I guess, and the science behind it. And that kind of led me to wanting to become a nutritionist. So I went to Curtin and did my undergraduate and Bachelor of Science there. From there, I wanted to delve a little bit more into the clinical setting about how diet relates to disease and that kind of relationship. So I went on and did my master's at Curtin and became a dietitian. And then I've always had a really big interest in how food relates to sports performance. So then I went on and did my sports dietetic accreditation at the AIS in Canberra and became a sports dietitian there. So really good variety in what I do, which is what I really love. And it helps that from uni, I started working in private practice too. So that's really great. So I can build that kind of rapport with different sort of clients too. So I can work with anyone from every day is different in terms of working with weight loss, general healthy eating, the more clinical side of things. So food intolerances, diabetes, and then working with the athletes. And another passionate area of mine being that mindfulness eating or disordered eating practices, that kind of thing. But I guess that kind of also led me to a fun side of thing where I am the dietitian at West Coast for the AFLW team, which is a massive thing for me and a massive West Coast supporter. So it's a good little starting point. So I started that in our first season there a couple of years ago. And I transitioned at the end of last year to being both their dietitian, but also their player development manager too, which is a pathway I didn't think nutrition would take me. But I guess I've always taken that approach with that mental health and well-being in my dietetic practice. So it was a nice little transition to help with player development too. So it's been a pretty big journey, and I've worked with different sporting teams and different clinical settings, but I've loved all of it. So it's just nutrition's kind of opened up a really good door for me, which is great.
That's an amazing opportunity to be with the West Coast Eagles women's team, and then to have another door open for you there. Is that the biggest highlight? Is this like the most fun you've had in your career so far? Or is it a big thing?
Absolutely. No, I mean, little career highlights is I really love what I do personally with my clients. Like, I'm sure you've seen it yourself. When your client reaches a goal, they have that breakthrough moment, and it's kind of that little bit of a life-changing moment, I guess. That feeling you get is just kind of amazing that you're part of their journey. So they're the good achievements that I love. But yeah, obviously working at a professional athlete level at West Coast has been amazing, and very, very lucky to say that that's what I do for work, because it doesn't feel like work. I know, it's one of those lucky ones, I guess. But yeah, it's been a pretty big achievement for me, I'd say.
Someone's got to be one of those lucky ones. So.
I know. I have to take time to be grateful for this, because you are.
Yeah, big time. Big time. And you laid out, as you were talking through your study so far, the nutrition into dietetics, into sports dietetics. There's an important distinction between those three that not many people know about. Can you lay out quickly what the difference between, like, what each of those levels of qualification can do?
Yeah, so it is a bit of a question that comes up a lot, dietitian versus nutritionist. The little plot twist in that is you have to be a nutritionist to be a dietitian. So we get that benefit of being both. But yeah, it is important to distinguish it as well, because nutritionist itself isn't a protected term. So I guess anyone can kind of be defined as a nutritionist, whether you were doing a 6-week crash course or you were doing an undergraduate like myself. But nutritionists basically work in more of the general area and more lifestyle-based changes. And then, as I was saying, we do the extra qualifications, whether it's a postgrad or a master's degree. to become a dietitian where you can have the ability to work in a clinical setting. So you work on more of that diet-disease relationship. So whether that's diabetes, high cholesterol, food intolerances, anything like that, you definitely want to see more of a specialist in the field, I'd say, and that's where a dietitian comes in handy. When you then take it up a notch to become a sports dietitian, that's when you really specialize in sports performance. So working with the athletes, how to get the most out of their performance, training, recovery, any adaptations required. It's best to kind of work with more of a specialist, so sports dietitian in that field. So that breaks it down into the different areas. But obviously, it's finding what fits and works best for you. But yeah, it can be confusing with all the different terms around. So it's good to distinguish it a little bit.
Yeah, good time. Again, good segue too, because the next question I had for you is just around nutrition information. There's just so much flying around on all the different sources of information in people's lives these days. There's social media and there's the TV and there's professionals like you and there's personal trainers who have some of their own philosophies as well. It seems really confusing, nutrition information. Do you know why that is, and what is it that you do to help cut through the noise and get to the truth that's really helpful for people?
I mean, I think you're right, there's so much information, but there's so much misinformation out there. And I think it is because, well, food, everybody eats food. So everybody has an opinion about foods. Everybody knows someone that's lost weight and what's worked for them, and they're so open to share it, which is great. But where the information comes from is a different issue. So yeah, we do have so much information at our fingertips. But I guess what a dietitian specialist like myself, I hate, as arrogant as that may sound, but I guess that's kind of what we are, because our job is we're very evidence and credible evidence-based. We do kind of cut through the noise and break it down into what is going to work for you. And I guess people get confused and kind of, it has a reputation where dietitians tend to have a reputation where we change our minds all the time, I often hear. But I think it's because people like a black and white answer. But unfortunately, we can't give a black and white answer because we as humans aren't all the same. So we're going to have a different response to different recommendations, science, wherever it might be. And also in that, because we are evidence-based, we're constantly doing different studies and the evidence is changing. So therefore, our recommendations will change according to that. So I think there might be a little bit of distrust sometimes. I hear that a lot whenever new guidelines come out, which have been based on evidence. But it's kind of going, okay, but seeing someone like a dietitian like myself, who our job is to kind of look at the evidence and then apply it to the individual in the best way possible as well.
Nice, good summary. We were just talking offline before we hit record about how in my field a common question is something to the effect of, what is the best shoulder exercise? And my cogs start turning straight away. And the short answer and the real answer is it depends. It depends on whether you're are you trying to get bigger? Are you trying to get stronger? Is it for rehab? Are you an older adult? Are you young? There's so many questions that I need to ask you before I can give you an answer to the question that you've asked me, before I can be of any real use.
Yeah.
There's a risk in just throwing a curveball answer, Hail Mary answer from nowhere, because it can be the wrong information for the wrong person. So I imagine that would probably be more full on in your line of work. Is that safe to say, do you think?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Because it is so individual based. And even when I have my first initial consult with someone, I always spend a good chunk of time finding out about the person, their lifestyle, what they've been through before, what they've tried, what worked, what hasn't worked. And it does sound like a bit of an interrogation, but basically it's because, you need to know the full information before you can even apply any of the recommendations. So when people ask me things just off the whim, I'm like, well, it depends. Exactly right. My answer, well, it depends. And people don't often like that because they want an answer. But I'm like, sorry, that is my answer, because it does depend, because we're all very different and different goals and different lifestyles. And it's about finding what works best for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is there sometimes where the right answer for one person is actually dangerous for another person if it's not given to them. Is that ever the case in your mind, or is it just chasing optimization and best practice?
Yes, short answer. But I think I guess with my practice, the way that I practice, a bit more realistic. So yes, I will always be evidence-based first. Mm-hmm. However, as I have noticed throughout the years of practicing, sometimes even things that aren't clinical evidence can actually work for people. Mm-hmm. So it's about, again, compromising, understanding more about the person and their lifestyle and any other clinical condition that might be going on, and then adapting what we know can work to where they're at. So, I mean, that's how I tend to practice, and because I find that's where you get the best results in terms of even a client buying point of view, I guess, as well. Because you're right, you want to make sure that whatever you've been told is going to work for you and your lifestyle. You don't just want to be thrown recommendations just because that's what science tells us. So I think it's important that you hear both sides of things. So yeah, what might work for one person, or what we know can work for one person, may not work for the next.
Good. It's a good framework for what we're about to work through. We'll fire a bunch of questions and pretty specific scenarios at you. And yeah, I guess you have a bit of an out now that we obviously are looking for the best general advice, but it really depends. It's okay to defer to this part of the story so far. So I asked all my clients who are interested in their nutrition at the moment to lay out some of the biggest challenges that they're having. And once all the answers came in, I rank ordered them and have pulled out a top 5. And one thing I'd like to do now is go through each of those 5 challenges in order and just get your best general advice, if possible, for someone who might be struggling with that particular challenge. So the first one is, and it was by a fair way, the first one was being inconsistent and having a blowout with their nutrition. Is that something that you see is pretty commonly in your practice?
Oh yeah, it's not surprising to me all that came up as one of the top ones. Let me try and be as general as possible, but basically it comes down to sustainability. So I always ask someone if the way that they're eating or intend to eat, if they can see themselves eating that way for the rest of their lives. If they can't, then I'm like, well, this is where you're going to have a inconsistency. You're going to feel like you're falling off the bandwagon. You're going to struggle to get yourself back on, or you're going to have blowouts because you feel like you've gone through this cycle of restriction and then binging, and then that guilt that you feel of it, and then your restriction, binge, and then you kind of get stuck in that horrible cycle. So it's always about sustainability. So making sure that you are getting all the nutrients that your body needs. So you're really highly nourishing your body, as well as finding that balance between, having a life, having those foods that you really enjoy, having those eating experiences, like going out with mates, spending time with your family, all things that could involve food, to make it more of a lifestyle-based approach. Because I think that's where diets tend to fail us, and I specifically say they fail us because they're so depriving, like they lack things that our body actually really needs. So when we feel like it's a lack of willpower and we tend to have the blowouts, it's basically our body going, oh, hang on, I really needed this. So you needed to give me this. It's not a lack of willpower. It's just your body's survival mechanism going, I really needed this. You need to give me this. So we need to work with the body. And that's how you kind of get that consistency.
Love that. It's a really good approach for a lot of exercise things too. Can you sustainably do this indefinitely, or a version of this indefinitely? It's a good litmus test question.
Yeah.
Next top one was consuming too much sugar. That's the best general advice for that.
Very similar to what I was just touching on just then about that finding that balance between restriction and making sure you have that inclusion. Now, the body will continuously send us signals of exactly what it wants from us. So if you're hungry, it'll tell you that it's hungry, and you need to learn to respond to it by feeding it rather than pushing it aside. If you're low in energy, that's when you'll typically start having the sugar cravings. So then we kind of go, well, why am I low in energy? And then we revert it back to the food we might be eating. So our body's most efficient fuel source is carbohydrate. So when someone tells me that they are having really big sugar cravings, and then when they start eating sugar, they tend to binge on it, I kind of work my way back, because usually it happens either 3:30itis or the after dinner eating, or tends to happen where the sugar cravings come in. Okay, well, what did we have for lunch? Did we get a good source of carbohydrates in there? Normally it might not happen. And then same sort of thing with dinner. Did we get some good carbs in there? Did we get some good protein? Did we get half a plate of veg? Did we get that variety that your body is after? And that kind of helps your body go, well, I don't need to send you that signal that I need that energy, because you're covering that. But also where that too much sugar can come in is, again, part of that restriction, binge, guilt, restriction cycle. And that's where generally speaking, I don't have foods, when I'm talking to my clients, I don't have foods that are good, bad. I break foods down into foods that are good for the body and foods that are good for the soul. So you need that combination of both. It's just making sure that you're finding the balance with that. So if majority of the time you are nourishing your body with that body food, what I mean by that is lean protein, good carbs, lots of fruits and veg, then your body's like, cool, I've actually got everything I need. And then you're just topping up with the soul food, because that is what you might enjoy, or it's, you know, like I say, going out with friends or anything like that. The more you restrict, the more you want. Like, we're like children. The more we tell ourselves no, we want it and we can't get it off our mind. And then when we have it, we binge, like I said. So that's when it's finding that balance between including it, but not feeling like you need to be so restrictive with it that you will cause that negative cycle to happen.
I've never heard that framework for food, like body food and soul food.
I probably should trademark it. I mean,
yeah, there's something there. Do you have a favorite soul food?
Again, you're talking to a massive foodie here. So choosing my favorite soul food is like choosing a child. But I do have a massive sweet tooth. But I do love a good feed as well, like a good burger. I'm Italian, so you're never going to keep me away from any of the carbs as well. So not that I classify them as soul food, but anyway. But yeah, so it's important to have that, because everybody has it. We just need to find how we're going to work it in. But you'll find that the more you kind of allow that soul food anytime you actually want it, it won't actually be there as often as you think, which is a bit of a tricky one to get your head around. But it is something that I love working with my clients with, building that healthy relationship with food and that trust with themselves and their body and their mind about how they can approach different foods as well.
I love that. So the next one on the list is eating the right thing for my sport. And just a bit of context around this. A lot of the people that I train are athletes, and that's community level right through to semi-professional, and almost all of them AFL. A lot of AFL women's players as well.
Great. Love that.
And so this would be in season for a lot of people interested in this question at the moment. Do you have any general advice or places to look for someone looking to solve this problem?
Yeah, so they're eating for the right training sport. So you can, obviously, eating does become sport specific, and even within the sport, for example, AFL, you look at different body composition types depending on what position you are in the field. But generally speaking, my main message to my athletes is fuel, fuel, fuel. We really want to make sure you are fueling your body pre-exercise, and then making sure you're recovering your body so that way you can really back it up. Otherwise, underfueling can really lead to poor performance. Health always first. Obviously, that's not healthy. But yeah, poor performance in terms of ability to make quick decisions, the agility movements, any skill performance that you're after is just going to go out the window if you're underhydrating, undernourishing your body. And what that looks like comes back to what I was saying before about your body's most efficient energy source, which is carbohydrates. So key takeaway message is, if you're an athlete and you are, or anyone really, we need carbohydrates. Specifically with athletes, you need to really make sure you are not restricting on carbohydrates, particularly the two forms of carbohydrates that we look at. So There's complex high fiber carbohydrates, which is a high fiber carbohydrates in terms of breads, rice, pasta, noodles, potatoes, sweet potato, any of that. We want the bulk of your diet to be that, give you that long lasting energy. But where we take it up a notch in that sports nutrition is more around that simple low fiber carbohydrate. So that's the one you time around training times, probably around 15 minutes to an hour before, depending on what it is. But that's the kind of carbohydrates that your body will break down really quickly and give you that quick burst of energy. It's not going to sit too heavy in your stomach, but it will give you that boost that your body is after. So that's things like fruit, muesli bars. It could be piece of toast or rice cakes with jam or honey on it, raisin toast, anything like that, which fits into this beautiful other category I call sports nutrition foods, which basically takes a little while to get your head around, but it's good foods that your body, again, will absolutely thrive on. So if you want to make sure you're eating the right kinds of foods to suit your particular sport or training level, I always make sure, are you getting enough of these foods in your diet and around training times to really fuel your performance, basically. Some
really good examples there. I am so late to the party with rice cakes, but I'm burning through them at the moment. Yeah. They're so versatile.
They are. And if you time them right, they're really great to use.
I think you've actually, in that answer, covered off on the last one, which is not eating enough for my physical activity, as that just links to sport. But one that came up was eating too much for my physical activity. Do you have any general advice for that?
I would then kind of question why that person might feel like it's too much. Again, if you're providing your body with the right kinds of food. So when I keep talking about body foods, I tend to talk in a bit of a plate setup. So ideally, when you serve yourself a plate, you want half the plate to be vegetables, you want about a quarter of the plate to be carbohydrates, and a quarter of the plate to be protein. So if you're providing your body with those foods, because they all serve an important purpose, like for example, protein, your body want to eat until you hit that protein limit. If you don't, you're constantly going to be feeling hungry. So we need to make sure that we're spreading out that protein throughout the day. Carbs, like I said, body's most efficient energy source. They also contain a good amount of fiber, so they can keep you fuller for longer as well. And that half a plate of veg or fruit, that's that vitamins and minerals and fiber your body needs. So if you are ticking off that box that you are getting those elements in the meal, then you will naturally form your own portion sizes where you'll understand that that's enough for you. If you feel like you are, obviously, yes, body composition can come into it. We can kind of play into I'm putting on weight. Not that I like talking weight terms too much, but notice that you're putting on weight or you're not able to run as much as you need to due to the weight, or getting injuries because you're carrying a little bit more weight, then you can kind of go readjust your portion sizes. But normally portion sizes tend to become quite big because you might be missing a certain element on the plate, and your body is just chasing that satisfaction. And that might come in with extra snacking, extra soul food snacking, anything like that too. So I think just bring it back to basics, assess what's on your plate, and that tends to sort a lot more things out than we realize.
It's a really helpful example, especially once you start to wrap your head around what belongs in the different categories of food, like what is a source of protein that's good to have regularly, and what should half my plate look like, and then another quarter. That's really practical. That they are the big five that you managed to answer in 4. So well done. That was really efficient. The next one I would like to do pretty rapid fire, because these questions could just about have a whole podcast each.
I'll try my best to be as punchy as possible.
We'll see how we go. So these are less about kind of general challenges and more specific questions that the people who answered this questionnaire that I sent out yesterday have asked that are interesting or useful to them. The first one is from Tess, and she said, what are some simple tricks for ensuring you have enough of each essential food group? What's a simple way to observe if you're getting enough nutrition?
Cool, Tess. Well, that just touches on what we just spoke about with that plate setup. So I like to get my clients to do a bit of a mental checklist with each of their meals, kind of go, where are my carbs coming from? Where's my protein coming from? And where's my fruit or veg on my plate? That then ensures that you're getting the nutrients that your body needs. So that's your main meals throughout your day. And then when you're thinking about snacks, if you think about why you're snacking, it's usually because you are hungry or you're low in energy. So then we go back to the types of foods that can really satisfy that. So again, protein, fiber, some good carbs to kind of give you what you need. That's why I always bring it back to the education side of things, understanding why we need certain foods and what those foods can do for us. And then you can then play around with how it's going to work best for you.
Nice. And Tess, I know Tess plays football as well in the same club as me. And one thing that I've found helpful, and I'd love your comment on this, is using your main training sessions as a bit of a test run to see how your body's responding to the different foods and if you're getting enough, and using how you're feeling when you start moving around and exercising as a barometer for whether you're getting enough of each of the essential kind of food groups. Is that advice that you give out at all, or do you want more keep it game day and training separate?
No, absolutely. Definitely do it. I mean, game day is very different in terms of how you set up your nutrition, and that is very specific. But just generally, even outside of sports, I always ask people in like a little interrogation session. I find out more about people and their lifestyles. I always ask, what are your energy levels like? And if people are telling me that they are pretty low in energy throughout the day, or they struggle to wake up in the morning, or they really feel those crash around 3:30itis, that's a really good indicator that you might not be getting enough. Same sort of thing with hunger. If someone tells me that they're hungry all the time, I'm like, oh, again, let's look at the quality of what you're eating. Why aren't we satisfying that hunger? And that can, obviously your hunger can vary day to day. But it's making sure that you are getting enough of the food that you're after. So training, when you put it back into sports, yes, training is a really great time to test out a lot of this, because you never want to try something new on game day because there's enough going on. But training is definitely really important to do that, because, yeah, you'll be able to feel whether your body is fueled enough. I often describe it, or ask people to describe it, like whether they ever have that mental disconnection between what their mind, what he wants them to do, and when their body is able to do it. Because sometimes your mind, especially as an athlete, is pretty powerful. And you're going, yep, I'm doing this, I'm going full steam ahead. And your body is like, nah, not today. So that's always a good indicator for me, going, okay, well, you probably didn't get enough fuel in. And then how you pulled up afterwards. So training sessions, like you said, are a really great way to assess whether you got enough throughout the day, pre-training, post, and then setting up from there.
Awesome. Just paying attention to the signals from your body. That's great.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Ben asks, I would like to know Liana's opinion on ready-made gym meals, so muscle meals, macro meals, etc. Her opinion on nutrition retention and on reheating meals in the plastic packaging. That's a really kind of holistic.
That is. I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask about the packaging one. But in terms of using those pre-prepared meals, Ben, this is a pretty common one that I hear too, and I'm all for that. I think, again, being a bit of a realistic dietitian, I'm all for using convenience foods to our benefit. I think our lifestyles these days just calls for it. And if we are advanced enough in our food system to have that, why not use it? So things like those My Muscle meals, even things like, microwavable meals, or even microwavable rice cups, frozen veg, pre-packaged salads, all of that kind of stuff. We can definitely throw in, work together, and make it work for us, provided they're still giving you enough of the nutritional elements that we're after. We can definitely use it to our benefit as well. So I think we can get so caught up in the clean eating, which I absolutely hate that term, and fancy superfoods, and just because I don't have this particular superfood at the time, I'm not as healthy as I can be. But no, we can strip it right back to basics. It doesn't need to be complicated or expensive to eat healthily as well.
Got it. And I guess the alternative, if your food isn't convenient, then and the alternative is either starving or Macca's on the way to footy, then prepackaged food starts to look pretty damn good for what it can give you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. Hope that helps, Ben. Baz said, "Is it bad to eat a big meal before dinner if it's eaten an hour or so before bed?"
Another common one, so I'm glad this kind of came up. Look, sometimes you just can't avoid it. You can't avoid having, whether you got late night training session or late night work session, and you come home and it's late. The only issue with having a big meal at night is if it's disturbing your sleeping patterns. So if it's making it difficult to sleep, that's probably the most important thing. It's not an issue of how your body breaks it down or stores it or anything like that. Like you often hear, you shouldn't eat past a certain hour, or you shouldn't eat carbs after a certain hour because your body retains all. Like, no. It's basically, if it's going to disturb your sleeping patterns, then that's a bigger issue, because, yeah, the lack of sleep can then impact how your body stores things and how you then react the next day. So if it's an hour out and your body's mostly digested it and you're feeling if it's not too heavy, then that's perfectly fine. You do probably not want to eat a main meal any closer than an hour to sleeping, but an hour out is perfectly fine.
And do you find that it disturbs some people's sleep and not others? It just depends on the person?
Yeah, absolutely. Some people I find need to sleep with a full stomach, and then others they can't. But definitely preference is always making sure you're getting a meal in, or snack, whatever that looks like, just making sure you're giving yourself something, because although you're not physically moving, your body is still burning a lot of energy getting through, 8 hours of sleep without eating. It's a lot. And then, if you potentially do fasted training in the morning or something like that, you're then putting your body through quite a lot. So you're better off giving yourself the meal that it's asking for.
Sure. And the next one is from Regan, which is, what recommendations do you have to avoid boredom eating at work?
Wow, big one. Big one. I think I've been finding this a bit working from home too. Again, what really helps you to assess that kind of behavior, whether it's boredom eating, stress eating, comfort eating, any of that, I think they get a bit of a bad rep. Particularly comfort eating. I think that we think that is a bad thing, but it's actually just your body's natural response seeking that comfort. What helps you to identify whether it's those sort of behaviors, though, is, again, come back to basics where I said make sure you're really nourishing your body. Make sure that your plate setup has what we're after. So your body isn't... So basically you're able to identify that it is boredom eating as opposed to actual hunger. Because if you're hungry, I definitely want you to have something to eat. But if you're boredom eating, then we can kind of go, what else can I do to kind of, overcompensate this, or, drink some water, or get up and go for a walk, make yourself a cup of tea, anything like that. But I don't want people to kind of push aside actual hunger just because they think it's boredom eating. So come back to basics, make sure you're getting all the elements in the plate, assess where that behavior is coming from, and then you're able to come up with strategies around that.
Nice. That's not the answer that I thought you would give. That's really...
Really?
Yeah. So like people jump straight to just assuming that the reason that they're eating more is because they're bored, when it might actually be for the reason that you said earlier, which is that your body's actually trying to give you a hint that you need more of something.
Yeah.
In nutrition. And then, the first step would be to get that, confirm that first.
Yeah.
Of what you're calling boredom eating.
Yeah. I think we just need to start working with our bodies. I think for so long we've been trained to work against it and almost using, punishment as a way to get towards our goals. When really, if we just work with our body and use that positive reinforcement and making sure that we're getting enough, it makes a world of a difference. And that then goes back to the very first point of, avoiding those blowouts and keeping consistency going, because you're actually finding a rhythm that's going to work for you.
Yep. And you gave some really good examples of quick things that can be used to combat boredom eating there too, in the drink of water, cup of tea, go for a walk. They work. Roberta asked, what foods assist in recovery from aerobic weights and DOMs? And number 2, any foods that help with joint pain? And number 3, ideal diet before a game that helps with reducing cramps. And there's a number 4, ideal diet before a game that doesn't induce stitches. Wow, where do we start? Let's keep this really punchy this one. We've still got a few to get through. So maybe let's hone in on the DOMs one. I know a lot of people are interested in that.
Okay, so this is going to make me sound like I'm banging on about the same thing all the time, but it's definitely fueling your body, and it comes back to carbohydrates. People don't understand how beneficial carbohydrates are in all areas. So again, if you're getting that fueling right, you're really helping with the recovery side of things, and the recovery is really important. So yes, when we think about sports nutrition, we think about so pre-exercise, we're thinking how we're going to fuel the body. So how we're going to get that carbohydrates into our body. So there's 2 forms that I mentioned, that's simple and complex. Post-exercise, you're thinking how are you going to refuel the body? So how are you going to get that carb back in to stock up your energy stores? Because your body does store carbohydrates, or your muscles do store the carbohydrates. We need to make sure we're refueling that. And then every time you use your muscles, you break them down, so you need to be able to rebuild them again. So that helps with that DOMS, as well as that prevention of injuries, and that's making sure we get enough protein back in. So that's that magic combination afterwards, that carbs and protein. So that can help, obviously, in addition to other remedial practices and recovery processes, but making sure you are fueling and recovering appropriately. Ties in nicely with making sure you're not suffering too much from DOMs.
Great. Any foods that help with joint pain?
Yeah, so that'd be more about anti-inflammatory foods. Now that's a little buzzword that people like to throw around, but again, let's strip it right back to basics, what that might be. So anti-inflammatory foods are our whole grain carbohydrates. It's our lots of fruits and vegetables. It's our omega-3s, so our oily fish. It is like avocados, nuts, seeds. It's making sure that we're also reducing inflammatory foods. So that's things like our very high in saturated fat foods, so our fried foods, takeaways, full fat dairies in abundance. All those kind of foods, again, in an abundance, can contribute to inflammation properties. So making sure we're reducing those as much as possible can help with joint pain.
Great. And reducing cramps?
Cramping. Now, a common misconception is people think that this is just hydration based. And then I get a lot of athletes that tend to just smash back the salt tablets and think that's the answer and that's all good. But actually the salt tablets are just a short-term fix. And so is the hydration. So yes, hydration is very, very important when it comes to sports nutrition. And there is 3 forms of hydration that we use. Water is always your go-to because, okay, we're thinking about hydration. Baseline, 1.5 litres to 2 litres a day. For every hour of exercise, you need an extra 750 mils of sports hydration on top of that. So the 3 forms being water is your go-to. Second form being electrolytes, so things like hydrolyte, aqualyte, Powerade, zero sugar. What that does is it basically replaces the electrolytes you're losing in sweat and makes your body hold on to it more. So yeah, you're more hydrated. Third form is the sports drink. So things like Powerade, Gatorade provides the hydration that you're after, electrolyte replacement, and then that simple carb, which is really beneficial to keep your body fueled. But main thing that we always look at with cramping as well is, are you getting enough carbohydrates? And again, like I said, I'm sounding like I'm banging on about the same thing, but carbohydrates, again, is so important. So your muscle needs to be fueled. You need to have that store of carbohydrate in there. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to contract your muscles the way that you need to, and then you're more likely to get that cramping.
You're team carbs. I feel like
I'm team carbs.
More people need to be team carbs.
I'm trying not to be the Italian stereotype, but that is just kind of where we're at.
Yeah, I'm here. It's coming through loud and clear. And hopefully people listening to this will maybe reassess and just what their average plate is looking like. And maybe give carbohydrates the airtime that they need and deserve if they've been restricting them at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
The last one from Roberta was ideal diet before, just reducing stitches was the last one.
Stitches. So that will probably pay into a little bit more about how closely you might be eating and drinking prior to training or playing. So you'd probably want to make sure you're getting that nice spread out. So you really want to avoid bulk drinking. Like, for example, I wouldn't recommend drinking a whole liter of water before you go out and train or play. You probably want to spread it out a little bit more. And if it is water that you're drinking, you might want to consider things like electrolytes as well, so your body can kind of get more bang for your buck. So have a smaller amount, but your body retains it a lot more. But definitely making sure you're not eating too close and also eating the right kinds of food. So when I spoke about simple carbohydrates, that's your key, because you can eat those sort of foods closer to training or playing without it impacting your body too much, like getting a stitch, that kind of thing. Anything that's too high in protein and too high in fat will take too long for your body to break down and sit heavier in your stomach, and then you're more inclined to, depending on what activity you're doing, it can not sit too well and want to come back up, but also you also get that stitch feeling too. So it's looking at types of hydration, how close, and then also the types of carbohydrates you might be eating prior to performing.
Got it. Now I'm conscious of your time because you've been really generous with your time just meeting up today. Do you have any more? Do you have time to go through another 6 or 7 questions? Do you have to bounce now? Where you at?
No, I'm more than happy. I love that. I'm a bit of like I said, I'm a nutrition nerd, science nerd. So I love when people are passionate about it too. So I'm more than happy to answer.
Great. Thank you so much. The next one, we'll keep plowing through. The next one, I think Laura is asking this on behalf of everyone who trains kind of up until and beyond 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. It's a similar question to before. I just want to know if there's anything you'd add to your previous answer. What is the best timing for eating before training and games? And if I get home from training past 8 p.m, is it better to eat even though I'm going to be asleep in an hour, or just to have a tea?
Okay, so hopefully I've answered the pre-training one enough. Yeah. But the post-training one, now that's a pretty, again, it depends. So I thought I'd pull out that card now because it does depend on the person and how they are feeling post-training. So one complication I find with a lot of my athletes is they're just generally not hungry post-training, and that is a common thing, usually because as your core body temperature increases, your appetite tends to decrease. So there are strategies about getting around that, but you are much better off making sure you are getting something in post-training, just to ensure that you're really getting that recovery process in. You're wrapping up that training session and you're setting yourself up the next day. Now, what can help with that too is sometimes I suggest to people staggering that recovery meal, what that might look like. So it might be a case of having like a recovery drink on the way home. For example, whether it is a sports drink like a Powerade, or for definitely wanting to get that combination of protein and carbs, things like an Up and Go or protein shake if you have that on hand, although it's not necessary. Milky drinks, like you'll be surprised that chocolate milk is actually the best recovery drink around because it does provide things like carbohydrates, protein, electrolyte, hydration. So having something, sometimes drinking something is a lot easier than eating something. So that's why I suggest maybe on the way home have something, so that way when you get home there's less pressure to have a really big meal. You might actually be okay with a smaller amount, and therefore it makes it easier to then go to sleep not long after. It just little strategies that I tend to work with my clients to try and find out what's going to work for them as well.
Good examples too. I think there'll be more than just Laura that's pumped that chocolate milk might be on the cards.
Oh, it can. When I set up my recovery bar, I guess, for the girls post-game, the AFLW women's team, on the hot ticket item is always the chalky milk. The chalky milk goes first. I do have things like Sustagen and soft drinks because they're all beneficial afterwards as well, but the chalky milk is just a big one.
You can't go wrong. Zoe is one of those people who has a ludicrously busy schedule, and her question is, what's the best way to improve on not snacking at nighttime. I find I'm pretty good throughout the day when I'm working or busy, but end up snacking on bad foods at nighttime.
Yeah, Zoe, I think you are not alone in that department, and I hope that I have answered that one somewhat earlier, but just making sure that you're getting enough throughout the day, because what the body tends to want to do is back eat at the end of the day to make up for what you've missed out on. And that typically happens because we're so go, go, go that we just don't have the time to eat, or feel that we don't have the time to eat, or we may not even get hungry. And it's not until we get home that we actually stop and you go, okay, well, I've been hungry all day, and your body wants to back eat. So trying to come up with some strategies that will work for you about making sure that you are eating regularly throughout the day. And then definitely ensuring that your dinner meal has exactly what it needs in terms of that good carbs, protein, fruit or veg, definitely half a plate veg. So that'll help with any of that extra soul food snacking that might take place when we probably want a bit more of that body food.
The theme that I'm hearing here that's really thought-provoking for me is the fork in the road with the nutrition seems to be a lot earlier than you think it is. It's not actually the nighttime that's the real your problem. You kind of have to look a bit earlier in your day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's throughout the day. So when I often get a client to fill out a food diary, I don't do it as a way so they can be obsessive about what they're eating. I use it more as an awareness tool so they can see some of these behaviors coming through and then link it back to what actually is happening. And normally what would happen is they go, well, I'm actually really not eating enough throughout the day. So I'm getting home and I'm snacking while I'm making dinner, and then I'm eating dinner, but they're not really finishing it properly because I've just snacked before. But then I sit down and relaxing and watching Netflix, and then in come those sort of snacks. And everyone's nodding along because yes, we've experienced it, and I've experienced it at times too. And then you kind of go, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? Like, what can I do to make sure that I'm just supporting myself to not allow that to happen again?
Yeah,
going to the
cause rather than the effect. I hear.
Yeah.
This next question is from me. I snuck one in as well. We talked about earlier some questions that I wouldn't call them beginner or naive questions, but they're big and broad and hard to answer. I'm curious about, in your opinion, what is a really good question or the best question a client can ask you to help make a big improvement in their nutrition?
Well, that's a good depends one as well. I think it's having an understanding about what their goals are. I think if they know what they want to achieve, it does give us some direction, but also knowing what their challenges have been or are. Because that then helps me to kind of go, well, that may not have worked for you in the past, or that did work for you in the past. Let's go along that route and let's try and avoid that route and what we can do around that. I think it's just having an awareness. So you don't need to have all the answers, and generally dietitians are pretty good detectives. We can kind of get it out. But it's also kind of going, all right, having to think about where you're at, what you need from the professional that you're seeking, and then also where we can go from there. I think that's probably the best way to get the best results too, and being completely open and honest as well. So don't feel like you can try and hide things from us, because we have our ways of working things out. But also, as you know, being a PT, you're only going to get out what you put in. So the more commitment you have, the better results you're going to get.
Nice. Goals, being aware of your own goals, your own challenges that you've hit in the past, and honesty. That's an important bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Zach this is pretty conversational, this question. He answered, cool. Can she tell me why I follow the hibernation seasons of a bear? Because I feel like I eat so much in the summer to store the fat, so I'm warm in the winter. Kind regards, Zach. Not a comment really, but do you notice that people tend to eat differently in summer versus winter, and how can they kind of level themselves out if that's a problem?
Yeah, I think it is a common thing, and I think that also we want to feel that way. We want to kind of go, oh, that's why I like to eat more when it's raining, or that's why I like, I don't tend to eat as much when it's summer. But your hunger levels are always going to change. And I think as soon as we start getting comfortable with the fact that we're not going to eat the same amount day to day, because it's going to vary so much on training level, type of training, sleep patterns, stress levels, hormonal function, all of that are all going to play into our hunger changes. So learning to cater to that. So obviously if you are hungrier, your body's obviously wanting more, so provide it with that. Because what will happen is if you do provide it with it, it's going to level out the next day because it's got what it needed. But if you constantly battle, well, I didn't eat that amount yesterday, so I don't need to eat that same amount today, well, then it's going to kind of come around and bite you in the butt because you're going to be hungrier than you were 2 days ago. So making sure that you're working with those patterns. And again, it comes back to my main messaging of understanding why we need certain food groups, making sure that your body is provided with those, and that kind of helps you to assess. Again, it kind of touches into a lot of that comfort eating side of things. So we do tend to want to comfort eat a little bit more in winter just because it's the nature of, being home, gloomy weather and all of that. So again, it's okay to have the soul food. That's what it's there for. But making sure first you are nourishing with the body food and then topping up with that soul food as well.
Nice. I've been on this planet 31 years and I have only just come across this, what you just described then about how your nutrition isn't a day-to-day thing. It's not confined. I used to try and get in this pattern and enclose the day without, I guess, disregarding the previous days and the days coming up and not noticing how much they affect each other from a hunger and energy level and all that kind of stuff perspective.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing stuff and something I'm very passionate about, especially I work with a lot of female athletes. I think it kind of just became my niche I actually worked with the female Perth Glory team, and then I transitioned to the West Coast team too. So female athletes for a while. We've just tapped into this wonderful world of understanding the menstrual cycle as well and how that impacts performance in terms of also hormonal levels, mental state, what we can do with our training programs, and then also obviously that hunger level too. Because again, if your hormones are different day to day, you as a person are going to be different day to day, and again, your hunger is going to be different day to day. So we can't expect ourselves to be the same every day. And then we need to make sure that we're also catering for the hunger day to day as well.
Good time and good segue into the next question from Emily, who is another one of the hyper busy people that I work with and train. So she's asked, what is the relationship between nutrition and gut health and hormones? That's a massive question. So good luck with that one.
I'm not sure I can answer this so punchy. But also I'm not sure I can give you a complete black and white answer with this one either, because research is really just starting to come through with this, which is really exciting. So pretty passionate about the link between gut health and our overall health, as well as gut health and our mental health, which is a really big one at the moment. But definitely there is a link between gut health and hormonal regulation too. We see this quite often in women who might have issues with things like endometriosis or PCOS, which is a pretty common one. Typically symptoms of like IBS are very much linked to hormonal regulations as well. So there is a big link in making sure that we're keeping the gut healthy and understanding what might be a trigger for IBS and how that relates to hormonal function as well as cortisone production. So our stress levels and how our body handles that is definitely through our gut health. So keeping our gut healthy is so important, especially because majority of our body's immune system sits in our gut as well. So if we can keep our gut healthy, it's our best immune defense as well.
That's great. I know Emily is unusually studious. She's a physiotherapist and is super evidence-based as well. Is there anywhere that she can go to keep track of as this research is unfolding that around gut health and hormones, and anywhere that you go that's might be helpful for her?
Just generally all the journal articles that are out there. So do a Google Scholar search. If you're still a student, you'll definitely have a catalog at your fingertips. But yeah, I think definitely using that critical analysis when reading those research articles is definitely helpful too, so you can work out what's going to be credible evidence or not. But it is exciting stuff that's coming through, and you'll hear a lot of podcasts and all of that coming through as well, as I've listened to quite a few. But yeah, it's pretty good, pretty exciting stuff. I know that's kind of me nerding out a little bit, but if you're interested in it, yeah, there's a lot of research at the fingertips coming through.
Nice. Maybe Emily and I can geek out and have a bit of a hunt.
If you find more, definitely let me know. I'm all here for sharing that stuff.
Yeah, big time. And 2 more to go. Jim has asked for easy hacks to get more nutritious foods into a busy schedule.
Okay. So this is where it kind of pays into using the convenience foods at your leisure, basically. Don't try and fight the fact that you need to be fancy and complicated. Having go-to snacks on hand can be really helpful, high nourishing ones. So I always like to say to people, if you're at a desk and you've got access to leaving things at your desk, that's great. Fruit, muesli bars, nuts, air popped popcorn, all that kind of stuff, just to make sure you're not going too long periods without eating. Big fan of throw together meals as well, just because I've been short on time myself. Like, I understand that. So using convenience options, like I said before, like microwavable rice and prepackaged salads and frozen veg and tins of tuna, or like this $10 roast chooks that you can get from Coles and Woolies, shred that up and you've got a good protein source. Don't be afraid to use that kind of convenience food to support you through it as well. But it doesn't need to be too complicated either. So even like a simple sandwich, like I think we forget how good just a sandwich and wrap can be to give you that nice balanced meal without overcomplicating things as well. So it's just making sure that, yeah, okay, one, being realistic and know, okay, well, I'm not going to get it perfect. There is no perfect, but I'm not going to get it consistent all the time. But how can I help myself out the best way that I can?
Great. Some good examples in there too. I love air pop popcorn. Last one from Sam is, there's a lot of myth and speculation around gluten and its effect on people. What's your experience with gluten and gluten intolerance, and particularly with people who aren't celiac? I.e. they think gluten doesn't agree with them, but they aren't allergic.
Yeah, okay. This is an interesting one. So gluten-free products are a bit of a fad at the moment, or have been for a while. But this is where I also kind of come into what the research says and the individual base as well. So research does tell us, which is true, that if you are, and this is probably important to know, restricting gluten when you don't necessarily need to, you can also bring about a sensitivity or an intolerance to it. So if they might not be, you might not be classified as having celiac disease, but you can definitely still have a sensitivity to it. And that can kind of come into play sometimes. And sometimes sickness, stress, change in hormones can bring about certain sensitivities, whether it's gluten, lactose, anything like that, and your body will constantly keep changing. So it's kind of important to understand those triggers or be aware of those triggers. But yeah, big number one thing when people tell me that they're restricting gluten, I want to know why. Like, are you not having it because you feel like you shouldn't, because that's the healthy way to be? Or do you actually get some symptoms from it? Some people I've also found, I actually work with a lot of people who have chronic pain, like fibromyalgia is a common one, chronic fatigue. And I do find that gut health plays a really big role in chronic pain as well, and that constant inflammation in the body. And gluten tends to be a big one for some people, not all, but some people, because it tends to trigger off IBS symptoms, which can then bring about inflammation, which can then impact their overall pain as well. So again, it is a very individual grey response. But I think the biggest thing is yes, you might not be intolerant, but you can definitely still be sensitive to it. But try not to avoid gluten just for the sake of it, because you will bring about an intolerance or a sensitivity to it. And there is research that suggests now that long-term gluten restriction, when it's unnecessary, can actually mess with your gut health and the good bacteria in your bowels and your gut. So just making sure that, again, you're just still providing with the body with what it needs.
Way to return serve. That's just something for Sam to think about. And again, back to that, paying attention to the signaling, I guess, in your body.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Amazing. That's all the questions that we had. I've got a quick wrap up here. If you don't mind, I'd like to share some of my takeaways. You might have seen me staring off into the distance and like taking notes as you went. Do you mind if I share some of my takeaways from today?
You absolutely can. I'd love to hear it.
So breaking those types of hydration down into 3 main categories is something I haven't come across yet, and that's a really helpful way to think about it, and the order that you should tackle them. So that was great. All the different examples that you rolled off the top of your head as you were answering the different questions were really helpful. There was some just classics, old faithfuls that you have heard along your journey, but it means so much more coming from someone who's studied for 5 years and has the experience that you have. So that had a lot of weight, which was awesome. Breaking your plate down into a half and then quarters is such a black and white way to look at your main meals. And sounds like once you get that right, it has this flow-on effect and seems to solve or help fix a lot of perceived problems in other areas of people's nutrition. The fork in the road thing, that landed with me. Whereas if you kind of feel like you're getting the 3:30 blues, it might not be 3:30 that's the problem, it's earlier in the day. And the day-to-day thing, where you shouldn't look at your nutrition in a silo in the day. You should be thinking about what you've had the day before and even in the week, and all that kind of overlaps and flows into each other, and playing a bit of a longer game with the nutrition. So they were some of mine. That's like really thought-provoking for me. So huge thank you again for your time.
No, you're more than welcome. And obviously, like we said, these are very general advice recommendations. So for more specific recommendations, definitely recommend seeking out a dietitian to find about what's going to suit you best.
Great. And good segue, because my next question is where can we find you? What's the best way to contact you and get in touch if we need more help?
Yeah, well, that's an unintentional segue, unintentional plug. But you can find me on the socials, so Instagram, I'm at Liana Nici _dietitian, as well as you are more than welcome to email me at liana.nici@live.com. And then I'm more than happy to hear from you, like any questions you might have. If you want to book in and see me, I'm always happy to help.
Awesome. And just before we started rolling, we were talking about a client of mine who's gone to see you recently, and he's had a really positive experience. So looking forward to seeing how that unfolds, and keen to see if anyone's keen to reach out to you as well. Great. That's it from me. Anything from you at all before we wrap up?
No, I just really appreciate you asking me to come on and have a chat with you. I love it, and I love the network you're building here. So thanks so much, everyone, for your questions, and thanks so much to Josh. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. And I've got a feeling we'll be in touch soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye.